Lecture 24.
Now, there's always a very severe interruption in the story at this point in the Book of Mormon, so much so that most people lose contact with where they were. We just gotten down to 74 BC and just finished getting the Zoramites preached to and getting their converts evicted by their brethren who hated them. We just get everything kind of settled down, and lo and behold, the Zoramites are ready to come down with the Lamanites and devour all of the Nephite people and avenge themselves. And then we get 4 or 5 chapters of the deepest doctrine in the entire philosophical spectrum of the church. And by the time we come up after that in-depth study of life after death, resurrection, final judgment, source of God's power, the atonement, all these things, you look around and you say, now where were we? Well, we're still back in 74 BC, and we've just finished with the mission to the Zoramites, and within this coming year, Alma will finish his life and be translated. So we pick up our story now as the Zoramites get ready to ally themselves completely with the Lamanites. Now, when they went up among the Lamanites and said there's a fractionalizing, a great dissension going among the Nephites, now is a good time to attack, there was a man who saw a great opportunity in this. A Lamanite named Zarahimna. Zarahimna. And it's easy to remember, it's almost like Zarahemla, only it's Zarahimna. And he not only had ambitions to become king of the Lamanites, which he was not, he was a general, but also used his military authority to take over the Nephites and put them under bondage. Now, this is the history of mankind. If you want social security and retirement, get somebody else under bondage to you, you see. You live the good life. They do the work, pay you a regular stipend. All you got to do is have a big knife handy and threaten to slit their throats if they don't pay the tribute. That's Rome, that's Babylon, that's Tyre and Sidon, that's Medes and Persians, that's Alexander the Great. That's what all of it was. Pay tribute so that we live the good life and you do the work. All right, now we've got the same thing all through the Book of Mormon. The Lamanites constantly trying to put the Nephites under tribute so they can live the life of Riley. The Nephites are such good workers, they raise such good corn, they get out and work like crazy people. But they get such good things out of the ground. So put them under tribute so we get our share of it without working. That's the spirit of this. So Zarahimna says, good, we march. So he took quite a little period of time there to get prepared. Meanwhile, a preparation is going on among the Nephites. And they know that the war is coming. And the Nephites say to the people of Ammon, the converted Lamanites who are here, since you're under covenant not to fight, we better get you out of here. So they've transferred them. Where'd they send them? Mulek? Mulek right here? Mulek? Oh, Melech. Oh, that's over here. Okay. Right over here. 3 days above Melech is Ammonihah. And down here is Entaperah. Humanize the Ezra, the Mendite. Over here is Aaron and Nephiah, Moroni. And we have one Athens. You're going to have all those memorized here in a few weeks. So kind of talk this up in your mind. So they've transferred them over from Jershon to Melech. What happened to the converted Zoramites? Did they stay to fight? Okay, Zarahimna comes down, and he has his warriors all prepared. They got bullet-shaped shaven heads. They wear nothing on their bodies except a little breechcloth. They got javelins and spears and bows and arrows. Their bodies are all painted to look as gruesome and bizarre as possible. And if you know the culture at all of New Zealand, where they made a fine art of scaring the enemy, they make their faces just as ugly and grotesque as they could, and then they'd come up to the enemy and they stick out their tongues down, blah, 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 you know. If you've watched the Kia-Oras dance, well, you know how that went. Well, that's what they depended upon. Scare the wits out of the enemy and come in as bold, bald-headed warriors to take them, Yul Brynners, and take them. Well, when Zarahimna got down and they took a look at the Nephites, what a sight to behold. How old was Moroni when he took over the fighting forces of the Nephites? 25. How old is he now, about? We think 32. Now you've got to make some corrections. If you'll turn over to page 111. In the next to the last paragraph, 6th line, it says, the Nephites were led by 25-year-old Moroni. Will you strike 25-year-old? Because I wrote this before we made this breakthrough. I'd always had Moroni at 25. Then I got to restructuring his life. That's why I restructure these lives, because we find out a lot of things when we put their lives together. All kinds of exciting things. Where you put this has never been done before, so far as I know, where you put his age in the BC and the year of the judges, and all of a sudden I restructure Moroni's life and find out he couldn't have been 25 in 74 BC. He's got a full-grown son who's a seasoned general 14 years after that. He's just not likely to be able to do that. So then I go back and see when was the last general who's named among the Nephite forces. And I find that was back 81 BC. And then I found no other generals are named, even though they had wars. And so when I figure it out in terms of that possibility, we find Moroni coming out right on. Everything fits in that restructuring. So I restructured it for you. So see that I didn't get that corrected. Do you know I've studied the Book of Mormon now over 100 times, not just read it, but carefully studied it verse by verse, and I've rewritten the Book of Mormon 3 times verse by verse, like this. Actually rewritten it verse by verse. I have only found two technical errors in the whole Book of Mormon by Mormon. It's absolutely fantastic. Joseph Smith wrote this at the rate of nearly 5,000 words a day. This thing is so complex that on a Sunday afternoon, he says in his diary, I carefully studied the Book of Mormon this afternoon. Carefully studying his own book? Anybody who says that Joseph Smith wrote this book has an impossible thesis to support. An impossible thesis. Now the two technical errors that Mormon committed are very minor. One of them is introducing a group of people without saying where they came from. Do you remember who those were? We're already talking about them. The Amalekites. He introduces them as apostate Nephites without telling you when they apostatized. They just are a group of people that are over in and among the Lamanites, and he never told us where they came from. That's one technical error. All the rest of the people he accounts for. The next one, he's giving a long resume of historical material in connection with our next 2 or 3 chapters, and he's listing the cities that fell to Amalickiah. He meant to say Moroni, and he wrote Nephihah. And he's giving the cities, and he had just talked about Nephi. Nephi is over here, Moroni is right there, and he said they conquered Moroni, and then the people fled to Nephihah, and instead of following the people in Nephi, he kept his troops on the coast and proceeded up the coast, so that very shortly he had conquered Nephihah, Lehi, Morianton, Omner, Gid, and Mulek. See, he's been talking about Nephihah, and it snuck in there. And a little later on, when Nephihah is actually conquered, he says, as I explained to you earlier, all of those who fled from Moroni went to Nephihah, but now even they were conquered. So it obviously was a technical error. The Lord let Joseph Smith translate it and left it right there. Only 2 technical errors in the whole Book of Mormon. And that's really the only technical error. Leaving out the source of the Amalekites is not an error, really. It's just an absence of information we wish we had. But isn't that fantastic? And you see, this is a technical error that I just made. I said Alma when I meant Moroni. Now, they'll pop up all the time in a heavy manuscript. And authors are very much accustomed to cleaning up their manuscripts over a period of time. Little things that sneak by you. Dates and you do a little mathematical calculation and mix it. I have one in the first 2,000 years now that I just discovered. Just ran across it. Did another tabulation and it's it wouldn't matter much. It's only off 1 or 2, but it's off. It isn't on. So that's why the first day I said we're not teacher and student, we're just students together. That's really what we are, students together. So I just wanted to kind of give you a feeling about this, because when you start doing comprehensive writing, I'm up to 18, volume 18 of different books we've written. And I want to testify to you that anybody who says that Joseph Smith could have written the Book of Mormon has never written a book himself. He may have done some scissors and paste on other people's writing, but he's never written a real comprehensive book himself. Yes. Right. Oh, yes. Right. There's one more. Return to Zarahimna. Yeah, that's right. Good. And I think we mentioned that in the text, didn't we? That's a third one. Well, good for Mormon. He was a champion. Yeah, thank you. That was Mosiah 25. Right. That's a third one. Well, I'll tell you, my testimony of this book just grows with every reading. I hardly wait to see Mormon and shake his hand and say, magnificent. You're recovering from wounds that almost killed you. You were a fugitive trying to get food, trying to keep the library of the Nephites from being stolen and taken, and you yourself ultimately got killed, and in between you got that written. It was a fantastic achievement. See, he wrote this book after the battle at Cumorah. All right, now we've discussed some rather exciting things before we got into this war period, and you know the answers to a dozen questions now that most members of the church haven't even thought about, let alone ask the question or listen to the answer. But your generation needs to know that answer, because the gospel is, the deeper you go in the gospel, the more thrilling it is. We found out that God has told us why he has to have us die. He wanted to tell us that it's possible in the second estate to have you live forever, but he doesn't want us to live forever. It'll completely frustrate the plan of salvation. Why does he need the spirit separated from the body? Because he uses the spirit for what? Why does he need the separation? Didn't we discuss that in this class? It's in the text. Right. He glorifies the spirit and uses that as the catalyst to glorify the gross matter that constitutes the body. So I've got to have your spirit out. Otherwise I can never exalt you. This is the science of the gods. I've got to have your spirit out. And so he put cherubim and a flaming sword around the tree of life. He wanted us to know that he could immortalize us in the second estate, and we'd be here forever with the spirit trapped in a physical fallen body, never to be exalted. And he wanted us to know that he could do that. But he said, I want you to die. I have to have you die. And when I found that in the 88th section, I had it, I preached it, I was challenged, and I lost it. I came back and couldn't find it again. And after Brother Widsoe told me it was there, he wouldn't tell me what the verse was. He says it's in a certain section of the Doctrine and Covenants, a certain part of the Doctrine and Covenants. So I'm reading and reading and reading. Finally, the Spirit says, now you see why they have to die. And the Spirit said it so strong that when I went back to look for it, I expected it to say in the text what the Spirit whispered. And this isn't what it says. It says, and ye who are of a celestial spirit shall receive a celestial body. And your glory is the glory by which your body is quickened. That's what it says. Now, out of that, how do you get the doctrine that we must die? Listen to it again. And you who are of a celestial spirit will receive a celestial body. And your glory, what glory is that? Glory of what? Glory of your spirit is the glory by which your body is quickened. You see, it's there. But I mean, you can't just trip over it and go on or you'll miss it. And I read it and kept missing it I couldn't find it again. And finally, the Spirit says, all right, I'll give you another chance, only this time write it down. So I did. 88. It's between verses 26 and 38. How's that? I'll be kinder to you than Brother Widsoe was to me. He used to keep saying, oh, Brother Skousen, I wouldn't deprive you of the excitement and adventure of discovering it. Man. So it took me 7 years to find some of the verses he told me about. But they were there. He'd tell me the book. He'd even tell me sometimes part of the book. I just wear them out trying to find them with my mind focused on that one theme and prayerfully seeking the Spirit to guide me to it. And eventually I found everything he told me about. But it took me a long time. Anyway, we know these doctrines. We know the source of God's power. What's that? What gives God his power? Being honored by the intelligences in the universe so that they'll obey him. Does there absolutely have to be an atonement? Absolutely? Scientifically? Inescapably? You're sure of that? You got a testimony of it? All right. You ask most people, they don't know why. Even if they say yes, you say why? Why? Because otherwise God would cease to be God if he tried to save us. Oh, God couldn't cease to be God. You don't believe the Book of Mormon? It doesn't say that in the Book of Mormon. Try 42. Alma 42. If you want to understand the reason behind it, try Alma 34. This is a great book. We know the answers to these things now. They were there all the time. But we weren't teaching them to one another. We're just reading past it, you see. For us. For our branch of the family. We don't know how many other planets it covers. We know there are others. There's a suggestion in the Doctrine and Covenants that there are 12 other planets occupied by members of our father's family that belong to our contingent also. They also were redeemed by Christ's sacrifice. But that's a supposition. We just know there are others besides our own. Yes, and Brigham Young said every family contingent has its own Jesus and its own devil. This apparently was the problem, that he was the only one who qualified of our family group. Satan was right up there. He was the son of the morning too, but he got up close enough to the Father to say, hey, I don't think that's such a good plan. You've been using all these eons. He thought we had a hang-up on free agency. He says, I think you just ought to put them down there in a straitjacket and pull them up through the second estate so that nobody sins. Get them all through. Why so many casualties? And the Lord says, yes, but if you introduce compulsion at any phase of their development, you introduce the seeds of civil war and revolution in the eternities. Everything that we have now out there operating does it because it wants to do it. That's the way you have peace. If any compulsion is introduced, you introduce civil war and revolution. Satan said, well, I think my plan's the best, and I think I ought to be given credit for it. I'm going to get the intelligences to follow me. I'm going to dethrone you, Father. I got a better idea. Father says, I'll send my son, my beloved son. So Jesus was selected, and the Father knew him well enough to know that he wouldn't turn it down. But he went to the Father and he says, you could do anything. Father, you know, you can do anything. Take this cup out from me. All things are possible unto thee, Father. Take this cup from me. And the Father came down and he said, yes, all things are possible unto me if I do them the right way. This is the right way, and it's the only way, my son. I'll lose this whole family and everything connected with it. Planets and everything. All disintegrates and goes without you. Oh, then he said, thy will be done. But in the Doctrine and Covenants, he said, I trembled and I shrank and would not that I drink the cup. But glory be to the Father. I overcame. So this is a tremendous thing. Now see, we understand this better now. So that when any of you seeking a special prayer, and you say, Heavenly Father, in the name of thy beloved Son, Jesus Christ, who died and suffered, will you please heal this, my child, or my loved one? Now you see, this all has significance. You can plead with God in the name of the Son, and he can grant blessings he couldn't otherwise grant. So it's in the name of the Son that we seek everything now. That's what Adam was taught. Ask for everything now in the name of the Son. Why? Because it's only through him you can come back. So it's so thrilling to know this doctrine in its dimensions, so that we can worship, as the 93rd section says. I'm trying to tell you enough about this so you'll know what to worship, what you worship, and how to worship. And I don't know how it affects you, but it's made all the difference in the world now when I approach my Heavenly Father, to know what he went through and what the Savior went through and how inescapably necessary it was. Now a question. Yes, that's in the Journal of Discourses by Brigham Young under Savior or Devil. I think you'll find it neither one. It's the, not Journal of Discourses, Discourses of Brigham Young, compiled by Brother Widtsoe. And it's also in the Journal of Discourses, but I can't remember the reference, but that would take you right to it. Discourses by Brigham Young. Well, he suffered in the garden and he suffered on the cross. Is that what you mean? Yes. It was a double suffering. The sweat of blood, you see, was in the garden, and the torture of the body was on the cross. On the cross, Golgotha. That means place of the skull. That's Greek for skull. Now back to Zarahimna. When he came down and saw what Moroni had done for these people, his people, of course, were stripped, virtually naked. That's how they came to fight in hand-to-hand combat, show their defiance of the enemy. He looks down there and the light is reflecting off of helmets, breastplates, arm shields, metal skirts, thick clothing underneath that, spears, javelins, bows, arrows, scimitars, clubs. Zarahimna rubbed his skull and thought, no use taking that on. And so he retreated. Went right back into the south wilderness. Did the spies follow him? Yes, and they could tell where he went, but they didn't know where he was going. How did Moroni find out where he was going? From Alma. And Alma says they're going to end up over here and attack Manti. Now I put it over here on the board and I've got it upside down for you. We put it the same as this map so we can have it the same. Here's Manti, and here's the river, and there's the wide place where the ford was. And then it gets swift again, and then here's the hill, Ripon. Now here's the wilderness over on this side. It goes right down here near Manti. A lot of details geographically we can figure out if you watch your text real closely. So they come streaming across here. They want to cross at the fords. We think that Manti had actually been built near the fords. Zarahimna was. There were fords at Zarahimna. The stream seems to have been very swift and big, however. They could throw thousands of bodies into the stream, you see, without choking. So it was a big stream. So we think that it was probably wide here and therefore shallow. And you see this in the major rivers all the time. And so when they came right across here and started marching across. They're going down to Zarahimna. Who is on the south side of this hill? Lehi, Moroni's old buddy. And you'll see here, they've been friends for many years. Lehi is there. He let them march almost clear in so that the rear guard was practically in the water. And then around the hill he came and attacked from the rear. Well, anybody that's been around military strategic situations before, like Zarahimna probably had been, would know that he probably was being ambushed. Whenever you're ambushed, fight back. Don't go forward. Always fight back. Fight your way out of the ambush. Don't try to go forward. So he was smart. He'd have been all right if he had gotten out, wouldn't he? If he could have fought his way through, he'd been all right. Because an ambush is always to trap you and hem you in from behind, and the biggest force is in front of you. So he was smart. He turned around and tried to fight his way back. But Lehi was too much for him. And they were slippery and in the water and on the beach, and they just couldn't make any progress. So Zarahimna decided to risk it, and he went right across the river. Got over there and ran smack into all the forces of Moroni. Now the smart thing to do then was to go south. So he headed for Manti, as far as he could go, and he got down about right here. What did he run into? What did he run into? More of Moroni's forces. Moroni anticipated the whole move. And so he had all these forces down there, heading them off there. So then they were cornered. Now how did they fight? Who almost lost the war at this point? The Nephites nearly lost. And Moroni had to move out against them and says, "Brethren, God is with us. We will win if you'll just keep fighting. Don't give up. Keep fighting." This is God's war. You must protect the people of Manti. Fight, fight, fight. And he's got this speech all the way through those 2 or 3 verses. And finally they were able to fight their way out. The Lamanites were forced to retreat. They came back to the fort. Lehi is over here just standing there waiting for them. Well, that's not so good. So they decided to stay out of the water where they've got good footing and to fight Moroni to the last man. Well, Moroni was not a man who liked to shed blood. So at one point, it was obvious that it was just a question of time till they had committed genocide and just wiped this army out, a total massacre. So what did Moroni do? What did he do? Stop the fighting and had his men all step back a pace. And then we have that that rather interesting conversation. Moroni says, we were only fighting for our lives and our homes. You were fighting to put us into bondage. God is with us. We are right, and you are evil and wrong to try and do this to us. We've not done anything to offend you. And that's why God has been on our side. So you can't possibly conquer us. And therefore, I'm going to give you a chance to save your life, Zarahimna, and all your men. If you'll take an oath never to come up against us again to war, and take that oath in the name of God, I will let you depart in peace. Otherwise, we will dispatch you to the spirit world summarily. And Zarahimna had a response. He said, God didn't do this. It was those breastplates and those helmets and those shields. That's what has won the victory for you. God had nothing to do it. But nevertheless, be that as it may, I give you my sword. But by the Almighty I will not take an oath, for I intend to come back. And boy, did that arouse Moroni. He said, take your sword, and let us have done with it now. And Zarahimna grabbed it and rushed over at Moroni to slay him on the spot. I wish we knew the name of that Nephite soldier that's standing there watching this, going back and forth, and all of a sudden Zarahimna comes up, that's as far as he got. And down he came. But the thick-skulled Zarahimna, I mean, you couldn't get through, even without a head plate. And so the sword slid off with a good hunk of his scalp. And that slowed Zarahimna down. That was enough for the soldier to put his sword into the bloody scalp and lift it up and says, now that'll happen to the rest of you. If you do not come forth now and throw down your arms and take the oath. Did he get a response? Yeah, that was enough for a lot of them. Yeah, that's it. That's it. Come up, threw down their swords, and departed off in the wilderness and went home. But not Zarahimna. And so the battle continued. Did Zarahimna get killed? No, he didn't. Did he finally take the oath? Yes, he did. He was so mad. He took the oath, though, and went home. But there was a terrible slaughter. They couldn't even number the dead. They just threw them into the river by the thousands. Both sides, but mostly Lamanites. Now, when they were down at Manti, they were fighting so fiercely here that those swords, they'd come in right in close to the Nephites, and they'd cleave right through those helmets with their swords. It was ferocious, vicious fighting, infighting. So Zarahimna departed. Now the Nephites went home and had a marvelous celebration with prayer and fasting, mourning for the dead, of course. And then Alma knew that it was time now for him to depart. And so he called in Helaman. Now, see, he's had his speeches before. He had all that teaching about the atonement and everything. That happened before the war. That was back in 74 BC. That's why I cautioned you that it was my judgment that the modern chroniclers that put 73 BC under all those sermons to Coriant and everything should have left it where Mormon put it. Just after the Zoramite mission and just before the war. That's 74 BC. But at the bottom of the page it'll say 73 BC. So I tried to alert you to that other possibility because I think the modern chroniclers erred there. Now it's 73 BC and Alma's ready to go. He's been very sick. From all facts that are known, he'd been quite ill. But even in his illness, he had gone forth to try and lift up the spirits of the people. there toward the last. Now he says, Helaman, I want to ask you some questions. And he got very profound and serious. He said, believest thou the words which I spake unto thee concerning this record which has been kept? Yea, Father, I believe. Believest thou in Jesus Christ who shall come? Yea, I believe all the words that thou hast spoken. Will you keep my commandments? Yea, I will keep thy commandments with all my heart. Very well. Blessed art thou, Helaman. The Lord shall prosper thee in the land. This is a father's, it's a brinkmanship speech. This is a deathbed speech almost. Well, even though he's not going to die, he's going to be translated. Now this Helaman is too young really to be prophet. He is too young. He's in his early 20s. But nevertheless, he's the only one he can give it to. Who did Alma want to give it to? Who did he want to make president of the church? A much older man. Who is that? Nephihah. And who's Nephihah? He's the chief judge. But Nephihah said, no, Alma, you had this for 9 years, president of the church and chief judge. You know what happened to you? You just couldn't handle them both together. Thank you, but no. So Alma had said, Helaman, you are the only one. And so he'd given it to him. Now he said, Helaman, this is a big secret. I want you to write this down. God has told me, and you write it. The Savior is coming. The Messiah is coming. And in the 4th generation, or 400 years, because they use the terms interchangeably in biblical language, our people will become so wicked, after a wonderful golden age of prosperity and righteousness, our people will become so wicked, they will be annihilated and become extinct. And even those who survive will become like Lamanites and be called Lamanites. Now write this down, but don't tell anybody. There's a great sorrow comes with being a prophet. Nephi was shown all of this when he was only 16 years old. When he came out of the vision and he saw his 2 brothers standing there, Laman and Lemuel, it so overwhelmed him with grief he couldn't even speak to them. When he realized what they and their descendants were going to do to his descendants. And he said in his record, I had to get possession of myself before I could even speak to them. It's a terrible burden to carry. You see your children and everything around you. Their children are going to become extinct. That was a terrible doomsday prophecy to hang over their heads. Now, Alma then blessed his sons, and he predicted that the wicked who inhabit America will find themselves cursed unto destruction. And he says there's a blessing and a curse over this land. And that curse hangs over America today. We've already had the blessing. Now the curse hangs over us. And that's why we do everything we can. Put 25,000 missionaries in the field now instead of 13 or 14,000. President Lee is pleading with the saints to remain united and not let secular things divide us. And we do divide on secular subjects. Take equal rights, for example. I read the amendment and it looked beautiful. It's very simple. Then I read the Yale Law Review and realized what they were doing to the women of the land with that amendment. I was shocked. Was its legal implications. Tried to share it with other people who had no legal background. Found it a little difficult. They didn't see the subtleties that were involved. They say, well, that wouldn't necessarily fall. It wiped out every state's rights protection that's been passed for women. That one amendment just wipes it right out. So that a woman has no more claim on her husband for support. She must go out and work for herself. If she has children, she must turn them over to the state, put them in a daycare center, and go out and work. She has no more claim on her husband at all. He has no more responsibility. He has no more responsibility to her and the children than she has. That was what that equal rights meant. It smashed the whole home structure of the Christian social structure. So President Lee has said, now those things we must discuss other than at sacrament meeting and priesthood meeting, because some are uninformed and some have biases one way or the other, and you just split apart. So keep the pure gospel coming in sacrament priesthood meeting, and then on the outside study these things and come to the best conclusions that you can. But I'm sure lots of people voted for that equal rights amendment had no idea what it was going to do. No idea. But we defeated it in Utah. In Idaho, they approved it last year and tried to defeat it this year. But they couldn't quite muster the necessary strength. Now the battle's being fought in Wyoming. Did it pass in Wyoming? Is that right? That's right. Well, they probably will get it, and you'll live to see the consequences. Actually, this is the way the enemy's won each time. By coming up with something that looked innocent and for a good cause, and then when we start reaping the consequences and start paying the income tax that was never supposed to have gone above 3%. See, that was the promise. That'll be the maximum. Let's write it in the bill. Oh, it isn't necessary. We never need more than 3%. Don't write it in the bill. It isn't necessary. Now you see it gets up around 80 and 90% corporate taxes. Well, that's the way we've gotten where we are, and why the Constitution is really taking a beating right now. Now, the present prophecy that hangs over our land is this. It isn't over women's rights, and it isn't over daycare centers, and it isn't over Democrats, it isn't over Republicans. It's over Satan versus Christ. That's all it's over. If the nation goes with Satan, with all he represents, the American civilization is doomed, just like the Jaredites. And our cities will be absolutely desolated, and will be inhabited by the 10 tribes when they come. And the saints will barely escape. 21st chapter, 3rd Nephi. If we can keep the nation from going Antichrist, and keep enough good people, don't have to have the whole nation righteous, but have enough good people, the nation can survive, go into the millennium, and help build a new Jerusalem beforehand. That's the last half of the 21st chapter, 3rd Nephi. And as President McKay used to say, that's worth working for. And so he said, missionaries, come, we need you. And I say to you, if any of you haven't been on your missions, don't miss it. Don't miss it. It won't be very long before you may not have a chance to go on a mission. We may be closed down completely. So while you're young and in a position to go on a mission, do it. Anyway, that's the way he ended it. He blessed the church and the righteous, and then he left Zarahimna. Where was he going? Where was he headed? Down to Melech, not Mulek, down to Melech. Did he ever get there? What did the people think had happened to him? They thought he had been taken unto God, like whom? And the Bible doesn't say it. So the brass plates told about the translation of Moses, even though our present Bible doesn't, and we had to have the restoration of the gospel to really find out what happened to Moses. All right, thank you.